Hi, Lars.
Hey, good morning.
Good night.
Good night. Yes, indeed.
Good night.
Global
Like,
event again. Yes,
yeah, it's always good, Lars.
mhm,
Always good.
definitely.
So, I
Yes.
am going to actually try to present this morning,
All right.
tonight,
Mm-hmm.
and you're gonna have to help me a little bit
No problem.
and let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, that looks perfect.
Did you just see a bird fly away?
I didn't.
You didn't, but that's all good. Always good, Lars. Always good. So I guess we'll get, I think people are still here. So
All
we
right.
can just probably go ahead and get started. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So thank you very much this morning, Sanya.
Yes. Yeah.
So welcome everybody. I today have the honor of introducing a little bit of a surprise this morning.
Oh, yes. Why
Yeah.
not?
Sanya Mathura to the audience. So Sanya is an amazing human being and a fantastic author, an expert in a great many things regarding tribology, lubrication, and especially from the point of benefits to the end user. Um, Fantastic to read and hear about all her stuff. So I'm sure you're going to love her presentation, and you're going to talk about why lubricants degrade and what you can do about it. Is that right,
Oh,
Sanya?
yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. We're gonna cover that this morning, and we're gonna
Fantastic.
cover that in 30 minutes, or maybe less.
Nice, nice. Take it away.
Maybe less. So, what we're going to do this morning, and I just wanted to keep it very simple, is
Hmm.
that we're going to talk about what is degradation. And Rafe really put us in a good place when he started talking about oxidation. I'm like, yes, well done, Rafe. And then we're going to talk about how we could actually identify if we have degradation. And of course, what we could do about it. Because I think at the end of the day, we always need to figure out what we want to do if we actually have this issue. So, that to me, those are the three key points. And we need to make sure that we have that. So, I know Lars did a little bit of my background. And thank you for that, Lars. Always appreciate that. I'm the founder and managing director of Strategic Reliability Solutions Limited, bachelor's in electrical and computer engineering, of course, engineering asset management, so many different board positions and series editor and all of these great things. But very interesting. A couple of badges that I picked up along the way, because we like to pick these things up. And those are some of the books that I authored in particular, the one that says the Preventing Turbo Machinery Cholesterol the Story of Varnish, written with Fluitech and with, Greg Livingstone from Fluitech. So that one's a great book, just saying, as well as the Empowering Women in STEM. But what we're going to talk about this morning, tonight, any parts of the day that you're in, is what is degradation. And one of the things that I always like talking about is straight into understanding the fundamentals. What are the functions of a lubricant? Because I think sometimes we forget and we figure out that we don't want to use the fundamentals. But if you don't have the foundation, then yeah, we're kind of not working that well. So the main functions, and I would say the five main functions of a lubricant would be to remove contaminants, to reduce friction, to improve efficiency, minimize wear, and of course to distribute heat. But the thing is that a lubricant can perform a different function depending on the environment that it's in. So if it's a hydraulic oil, then the purpose at that point is actually to transmit power. If you're looking at a lubricant from the aspect of oil analysis, then its function is really to tell you what's going on the inside of the oil. So in that case, it's actually like a conduit of information. So lubricants can have different functions depending on what you're thinking about and what environment it's being used in. So just some things to, keep in mind. And the thing about it is that from the moment that a lubricant enters your system, it's going to actually start working with your system. And that's one of the main reasons that lubricants are, thought about as sacrificial. And even though they are sacrificial, sometimes people get confused with it being sacrificial and with it being consumable. And I know Lars and I will be talking about that a little bit later on at 11. But from the moment it gets into your actual machinery, it's going to start working and it's going to start using up its additives. So at that point, it's still fine. But the problem that we have is when it gets to the point where it no longer protects your equipment. And like by definition, if it is that something is not performing any of its different functions, then it's actually failed. So in that case, we would say that we actually have some sort of degradation going on. And that's when we have the issue, because if the lubricant is not providing the function, then it's actually doing more harm than good. So that's what I want you to think about when you start thinking about, actually what is lubricant degradation. And we have the different 6 modes of degradation, which I could talk about for the entire day or even write an entire book on it. You should check that out. That's the first book. But we have the 6 modes of degradation, and it's oxidation, thermal degradation, microdieseling, electrostatic spark discharge, additive depletion, contamination. These are just 6 of the main ones because there are others that exist as well. These are just the ones that I'm going to cover today. And like these are the very, I would say, very interesting ones. But just to let you know that not every time something degrades, it's oxidation, as Rick was saying before. So, one of the good things we need to think about is how we could actually identify degradation. And this one is that the one that you really need to pay attention to, because while we know about oxidation and we know that it's the main star of the show, there's a difference when oxidation occurs because you actually have a loss of antioxidants. And that is one of the key things that you can actually look for when you are trying to decipher what is going on with your oil. Now, it's going to produce varnish and sludge just for oxidation, but you can also get varnish and sludge in other cases as well. With thermal degradation, on the other hand, you would start seeing temperatures increase to about 200 degrees Celsius. And for those of us who are very familiar with oil, we know that for every 10-degree rise above 60 degrees, you essentially half the life of your oil. So you're talking about oils going past 200 degrees Celsius. And what happens there is that you have the molecules start cracking, and it's actually going to be producing something like carbon deposits at the end of the day. So different mechanisms would have different types of deposits and different environmental, factors that would lead to that. Microdieseling, which is very cool, not for the equipment, but it's very interesting because they actually talk about entrained air. So what happens in microdieseling is that you actually have air being entrained in your oil, and eventually that bubble that is in your oil is going to produce varnish, is going to produce tar, is going to produce resins, some sort of soot. So it can lead to a lot of damage on the inside of your equipment, which is different from oxidation. On the other hand, electrostatic spark discharge. Now, this one happens when you have friction at a molecular level and you actually have static buildup on inside of the oil. And that's actually going to increase the conductivity of the oil. And it will lead to produce varnish and sludge at some point in time. So that is very different compared to some of the others. And you also have additive depletion. Now, additive depletion is when you have a loss of additives. And it is a bit of a degradation process because sometimes you can lose the additives due to leaching or some sort of contamination. And your additives are there to actually protect your oil. So if you're not protecting your oil, then again, you're failing to protect your equipment at some point in time, and it's going to produce some sort of deposits. Your last degradation process is contamination. And a lot of people think that this is not a degradation process, but if you do not figure out if you have contaminants getting into your system, then that can actually lead to oxidation or microdieseling because those contaminants can be catalysts. So if you're looking at the bigger picture and the root cause of it, you need to be able to identify if you have any sort of foreign particles getting into your oil. So that is a degradation process in itself. So just something to be very mindful about. And what I wanted to do is to sort of compare the three main ones in terms of thermal degradation, microdieseling, and ESD. Because some of people get these three of them confused. But if you look at the temperature ranges, thermal degradation starts at about 200 degrees Celsius. But microdieseling goes up to 1,000 degrees Celsius, and then ESD is about 10,000 degrees Celsius. So you can see the difference in terms of the temperatures with each of these different types of mechanisms. So that's why it's important to know what's going on inside of your equipment, because if you don't know that, then you can't actually like assess the problem and see what you have to do about it. But what I wanted to get to would be the different types of lab tests, because even though we know that we have these types of mechanisms, you need to be able to prove it at the end of the day. And being able to actually have some sort of evidence that you have any of these things going on, that's what you're going to have to do because you're going to have to actually monitor that over a period of time. So when you're looking at oxidation, some of the tests that you really want to do is ruler and RPVOT. Now, ruler stands for remaining useful life evaluation routine, which is a lot to say. That's why they shortened it. And that actually represents, it takes a quantified version of that antioxidants that you have remaining in your oil. If that gets down to about less than 25%, then you have an issue because that's when your oil is no longer protected and you can't.
Sonia, I'm very sorry to interrupt you for
Oh,
a second. I think
yes.
your slides are actually not
Oh, they're
moving
not showing.
presentation. I think we are looking at your not at your presenter screen.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay. Hang
it's
on.
first slide. Yeah,
Oh, it's still on the first slide?
yeah, yeah. I think you have to
Okay, hang on. Let me check. Let me check that back. I'll probably do entire screen then.
Mhm.
Share. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So you missed a lot then. That's good?
Yeah, now it looks good.
Okay. All right. So I'm going back into oxidation now. Um, with oxidation, you have different types of lab tests. So you have the ruler and the RPVOT. And with your ruler test, it actually quantifies the amount of antioxidants that you have remaining. And with that, you need to be able to actually quantify what's going on inside of your equipment. And that kind of helps you to figure out if you have oxidation actually occurring or not. With your MPC tests, that is your membrane patch coulometry test. And what happens with that one is that it's a varnish potential rating. So it's going to tell you if you have the potential to have varnish actually occurring in your equipment. And you have different ranges for different things. So if it's below 20, then it's usually that's a normal range. Between 25 to 35, it's an abnormal range. And 35 and above is like critical. But depending on your actual equipment, you may have different values. And with oxidation, you actually have color changes. You might have rapid color changes as well. And FTIR, which is Fourier transformer infrared, that actually tests for the presence of insolubles. And with that one, it's almost like you get a fingerprint of the oil itself and figure out what's going on the inside. And even though I have acid number here, and I have that for an increase of zero point 0.3, your acid number only increases when you have oxidation already occurred in your equipment. So that is not the best indicator of if you have oxidation occurring. It really indicates if you already have oxidation that has, you know, gone through your oil and probably all of the antioxidants are gone, but definitely want to pay attention to as well. And if we're talking about oxidation, you need to talk about thermal degradation as well, because these two actually get mixed up a lot. With thermal degradation, you actually have a decrease of about 5% with your viscosity. With oxidation, you may see an increase in your viscosity. So, just one of the things to think about when you're trying to decipher between the two of them. With thermal degradation as well, you get rapid changes in the color of your oil. But you need to be able to identify this and to be able to say, yes, you have this happening. You also can use FTIR, and with thermal degradation, you actually have carbonaceous deposits at the end of all of your degradation happening. So is you're going to have dehydrogenation of your oil. So that's one of the telltale signs with thermal degradation. So something to pay attention to when you want to, try to identify which of the different things you have going on. With microdieseling, this is the one that you have air bubbles getting into your system. So if you have air bubbles getting into your system, you're going to start seeing some sort of cavitation happening on the inside of your equipment. And if you see that happening on the inside of your equipment, that is like a telltale sign that you actually have microdieseling happening on the inside, because that is definitely one of the signs you're going to look for. If you're going to do tests for this, you're going to do FCIR and QSA. And what that sort of does is that actually helps you to understand if you have what you have in your oil. Because with microdieseling, you can have a range of different things resulting at the end of the entire process. So you're going to have soot, you're going to have tars, you're going to have sludge, you may have coke, carbon insolubles. So these are the things that you want to look for if you're trying to identify what is happening between either of the different degradation mechanisms. If you're looking at electrostatic spark discharge, this is the one where you have static being built up on the inside of your equipment. And what happens there is that you'd always see that the static gets discharged on any of the filter membranes, and you'd start seeing burnt filter membranes. So that is one telltale sign that you have ESD occurring, and that would usually be in your hydraulic oil systems. So something you want to pay attention to. A lot of times the operators would say that they hear some sort of like sparks or something going on the inside of their equipment when they're passing by it. So definitely something you want to take into consideration. FTIR and QSA, those help you to understand if you have any varnish, sludge, or insoluble materials involved. And of course, your ruler, because your ruler test is very versatile. They will tell you if you have any depletion of antioxidants in your actual oil. And DGA, which is dissolved gas analysis, it can tell you have the presence of acetylene, ethylene, and methane, because those are the ones that will happen if you have ESD going on in your equipment. Now, additive depletion, which is very interesting, is that it tells you if you have the presence or the absence of additives. And the absence of additives actually can give you an indication if you have your additives being depleted very quickly or not. So this is a good test that you would want to do if you're going to be, trying to assess what's going on inside of your equipment. Color is very important as well, because certain additives, they leave different colors. QSA, very important for the presence of insoluble materials. Ruler and RP Beauty will help you as well, because your ruler will help you to understand if you have any sort of depletion of your antioxidants. So that is critical. And of course, with contamination, this could be the root cause for anything that's going on with different mechanisms. Check out for your color, your presence of water, fuel, or coolants. Those are very important as well to know if you have any sort of contamination going on inside of your equipment. And of course, down to the last part, what can we do about degradation? There are four main things you can do about degradation. The first thing you need to do is be able to understand the equipment, because if you are trying to assess your equipment, and we'll go through it in a little bit, but you need to understand what's going on with your equipment, how you're going to deal with it, determine your applicable tests, interpret the results, and implement some measures for it. But when you're understanding your equipment, I think sometimes what you need to do is know that if it's critical, semi critical, or non critical. So you're not going to put a bunch of different expensive tests on your non critical piece of equipment. You're going to put that towards your critical pieces of equipment, which is like your turbines, stuff that will go down. If that goes down, the entire plant goes down. Those are your critical pieces of equipment. Your non-critical pieces of equipment, those are the ones that if those go down, they're not going to affect the functioning of the plant. So those are not the ones that you want to pay attention to them still, because everybody deserves a little bit of attention. But the critical ones are the ones you want to place a little more emphasis on, because that's where you'll get a lot more trouble when those go down. So many applicable tests. Now, these are the main tests that can tell you if you are monitoring your equipment and trying to see some sort of changes. Of course, your viscosity test is the most important one. If you start seeing any sort of changes in your viscosity, plus or minus 5%, that's where you start seeing changes happening. Either you have a decrease or you have an increase. If you're seeing a decrease, you're looking towards thermal degradation. If you're seeing an increase, that's probably oxidation. If you're looking at any sort of contaminants getting into your system, presence of fuel or presence of water, depending on the application. If it's like a marine diesel engine, you're going to be looking for those as well. Increases in your total acid number or your total base number, very important as well. That can tell you if you have an acid buildup in your actual oil, or that could go towards your equipment and damaging it. And if you have a high concentration of any of the wear metals on the inside of your equipment, that can tell you if you actually have some sort of wear going on. And that's when you need to actually look at if you have an issue happening on the inside of your equipment, and if your additives are being depleted too quickly, or if you have contaminants getting into your equipment. So these are like your four main base tests. And then depending on what you see from these tests, that's what you're going to do you're going to get a higher level of testing and more. Those are a little more expensive, but more specialized testing to determine what is going on. So the part that a lot of people miss is actually interpreting the results. And being able to interpret the results, you need to assess what are the conditions that you're seeing in your tests. Like in your oil? Are you seeing like an increase in viscosity? You're seeing a spike in acid number, dark colors, no water present, being able to identify the mode and then being able to verify it with the right type of test. Because the right type of test is very important to understand what is going on with it. And implementing different measures. So you have to implement different measures accordingly, because whatever is going on the inside of your equipment, you want to be able to stop that or to maybe slow it down in some way or another. And one of the main things you can do with oxidation is probably some chemical filtration or some sort of fluid enhancement. Lars is probably going to give us some information on that later. One of the things you can do as well is adjust the clearances, and that would reduce your temperatures, but you definitely need OEM approval for that. So make sure you get that approval from your OEM. When you're thinking about your residence time for your oils, because you have the temperatures, increasing a lot, what you would want to think about is if you increase your residence time, you're going to allow your temperatures sometime to cool down, and you're probably going to allow the air to escape if you have microdieseling happening. Kidney loop filtration, that's also a great thing to do. It can remove some contaminants. And if you have like any sort of ESD filters, anti-static filters, that will actually help remove some of the static that you have on the inside of your equipment. So those are some measures that you can take, like when you're thinking about, trying to handle this degradation process. And those are just some of the things that you can actually do for that, because I want to make sure that you had some actionable items. And that was it for my presentation. So I will probably stop sharing because I cannot see the screen and add Lars back to the
Yeah.
stage. Because
Thank you.
you got locked out of the stage, did you?
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's right. No problem. No problem. Good.
I'm sorry about that. But do we have any questions on that?
Yeah, we do. We have one
Oh, we
question
do.
from Tiara.
Ah,
It's
Tiara.
yeah. They are asking if it's possible for the MPC test to not heat the sample for 24 hours.
No,
They
you
are
need to
saying,
hit that sample. I'm sorry.
yeah.
You need to hit the sample, and one of the reasons that you have to do that is that you're trying to emulate the conditions that you have going on the inside of your equipment. And by not heating the sample, you're not emulating those conditions. So you need to do that just to make sure that you have a representative sample and a representative condition of what's going
Mhm.
on inside of your equipment. So sorry, no way around that one.
Clear. Thank you. Um, no further questions. I do have a
No,
question when listening to
yes.
your presentation, Sonia.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk now about shear stress
Oh,
deposits.
yes.
So where would you place that in all of that? Would that fall under thermal
Hmm.
degradation, or would that in the future maybe
I
deserve?
think I feel like it deserves its own place
Mm-hmm,
because it is slightly different, and the
mm-hmm,
way that the conditions for that is a little bit of a mix.
mm-hmm,
So I would put that in a class of its own and make
mm-hmm.
sure that we study that properly because that is the one that is almost a silent killer.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's difficult, it's very difficult to detect that one. So I would definitely put that in class of its own.
Okay, all right, great. Thank you. Let's see. Oh yeah. So I think we have another question
Oh, we
here.
do.
What quick test can we do on site? And I think this also reference what I
Mm,
was thinking because what we see
yeah,
in Asia, for example, a lot is the availability of lab tests and
yes,
the difficulty of getting a sample to a lab to do all these tests can be quite a challenge. So
yes.
I think that's also where this question comes from. What quick tests can we do on site?
Hmm. So there are a lot of quick tests that you can do if you're trying to assess if you have any water in your oil. A,
Hmm.
a great way to do this, and definitely not where you have flammable equipment, would be to use a metal spoon and put that oil in it and run a flame below it. If you run a flame below it and you hear some sort of popping, you definitely have too much water in your oil.
Hmm.
Like that's just a
Okay.
quick, easy check for that one. To
Yeah.
check if you have any sort of fuel in your oil, you can use like a coffee filter and do a drop of the oil onto the filter, and then just let that span out. And if it spans out and you see the rainbow colors at the end, you have fuel in your oil. So
Huh.
just like some very quick, easy ones that you can do. The others
Right.
you really need to get it to a lab because
Yeah.
you need to get some numbers involved. There are only so much that we can do with all the numbers.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. So the end user should pressure the lab to get all these tests
yes,
available to them.
definitely, and try and get them involved more because we need to be able to get our equipment running and not have so much downtime because downtime costs a lot of money.
Yeah. Absolutely. And it all starts with generating data.
It does. It definitely does.
Good. I think we're just on time
We're
right now.
just on time. Great.
Perfect. Beautiful presentation, Sonia.
Thank
Thank you so much.
you.
It was
All
a pleasure
right. So
talking to
we're
you.
gonna break for a little bit and then
Yeah.
we're gonna come back with Prasad. I know she's online, so I'll see you all in a bit.
Yeah.
Bye.
Forward to that. See you later. Thank you, Sonia.